波動拳放流拳
やった！
Welcome back to another edition of Components Breakdown. Today I'm going to take a look at another title in Sirlin Games' catalog called Puzzle Strike Bag of Chips. Puzzle Strike was initially released in 2010 and is a 2 to 4 player deck building game that uses chips instead of cards to advance the gameplay. Now the game is based off a very popular video game franchise called Puzzle Fighter, which essentially was a puzzle game spoofing both the fighting game characters of Capcom Street Fighter and Darkstalker franchises, and the mechanics of puzzle games like Tetris. Puzzle Fighter was originally released in 1996 and has become a cult classic since then due to the combination of both its incredibly addicting gameplay and the use of some highly recognizable yet super deformed pulp culture characters. Let's go ahead and take a closer look at Puzzle Strike and see how the forms of media have influenced the game's components. There are 3 versions of the game Puzzle Strike, the first 2 of which were released in 2010 and contain some pricier wooden components inside of them. This is the 3rd edition of the game and is the one I'll be covering in more detail here, and features about 350 of these small 1.5 inch cardboard chips that are about 1/8 of an inch thick. Now, due to their thickness, the chips feel very sturdy and have a wonderful print quality to them, with distinguishable and easy to read markings despite their somewhat small size. The tray inside is likewise nicely made and clearly marked, which allows players to quickly find the desired chips for the setup of each of their games. There is an 8-page rulebook that is cleanly written and easy to understand. And should questions ever arise about the use of specific chips in the game, there is a very helpful 3-page note sections at the back explaining all of their uses in the game. Finally, there are 4 purple velvet bags that are included with the game that will be used for randomizing, shuffling, and the drawing of players' chips throughout the game. When players set up the game, the first thing they're going to do is choose from the 10 possible included characters within the game. Each of these characters has exactly 3 unique character chips that are pretty easily distinguishable from one another by the character's picture at the top of each of these chips. Next, players will take their 3 character chips, 1 Crash Gem chip, and 6 1 Gem chips and put them into their purple bags and shuffle them accordingly. Players will then set up what's called the bank. The bank will consist of 18 stacks of chips that comprise all the abilities and actions that players can purchase and then use on future turns in the game. 10 of these 18 stacks will include puzzle chips, which include many of the unique actions and options in the game. The other 8 stacks will consist of a group of chips that are used in every single game of Puzzle Strike that you will play, and they include gems such as the numbered 1 through 4 gem chips, the combined chips, the Crash Gem chips, the double Crash Gem chips, and the wound chips. Finally, each of the players will draw 5 chips from their bags to use as their starting hands. The goal of Puzzle Strike is to minimize your own gem pile and to overflow all of your opponent's gem piles with gems totaling 10 or more. Now, your gem pile is a special zone that is on the table and is kept separate from your hand, your discard pile, and your bag of chips. Players' gem piles will automatically fill every turn, but can also be filled by the attacks and actions that your opponents take against you. In essence, your gem pile kind of acts as a game-ending marker for each of the players. And if a player ever ends their turn with the gems in their pile totaling 10 or more, they're out of the game. Now, as with other deck-building style games, players will start the game with just a very small deck of chips at their disposal, but will be able to customize their decks each turn by purchasing more and more chips as they play through the game. Eventually, players' decks will be able to crash several of their own gems each turn. Crashing simply means to break or remove them from their own gem pile and send them over to their opponent's gem piles. Let me show you exactly how the game is played. A player's turn will consist of 4 specific phases that take place in this order: ante, action, buy, and cleanup, or AABC for short. Now, at the start of the game, each of the player's gem piles will be empty of gem chips. During their ante phase, the active player will take a 1 gem chip from the bank and add it to their own gem pile. During the action phase, the current player may play 1 action chip face up on the table in front of them and then enact that chip's special ability. Action chips are easily distinguishable from other chips in the game due to their colored banners and will provide players with a variety of unique abilities in the game, including the ability to play multiple actions, draw additional chips from the player's bag, attack players, crash their own gems, or even a combination of several of these abilities plus numerous others that are available within the game. Once a player has taken all of his legal actions, they will then proceed to the buy phase, in which the player is allowed to purchase as many chips from the bank as they wish, as long as they have the available gems to do so. Players must always buy at least one chip on each of their turns, and may only purchase chips with funds available from their hand or action abilities that were used on that turn. They are not, however, allowed to use gems from their gem pile to make purchases. Costs are located at the top of each of the chips, and when purchased, they are placed in that player's discard pile without triggering its effects, and will eventually get reshuffled back into that player's bag as the game progresses. The last phase is entitled Cleanup, and simply involves the player placing all of their used action chips, any chips that remain in their hand, as well as any of the gems that were used to purchase from the bank, back into their discard pile. The player will finish their turn by drawing back up to 5 chips from their bag, reshuffling their discard pile into their bag if they do not have enough available chips to draw the required amount. Now, there are 2 additional features of the game that need some mentioning and explanation. The first is called the height bonus, which is a built-in mechanic that allows players who are close to losing the game the ability to draw additional chips from their bag, dependent upon how many gems are currently in their gem pile. The more gems that are in their gem pile, the more chips that they are allowed to draw. Now, these bonus chips are in addition to the usual 5 chips that players draw at the end of their cleanup phase, and effectively provide players with a few more options at their disposal on their next turn. Now, if players have built their decks properly through the course of the game, they should be able to mitigate their gem pile problem by combining and crashing those problematic gems into their opponents. Which brings me to the next phase of the game, the combining and crashing of gems. These 2 mechanics, which are action abilities found in several of the game chips, are essentially where games of Puzzle Strike are won and lost by its players. And those who do these 2 actions the most effectively will almost always win. Now, combining allows players to combine 2 gems in their gem pile into a single gem of the same value, such as combining 2 1 gems into a 2 gem, or a 3 gem and a 1 gem into a 4 gem. Now, although that may not look special since the overall values remain the same in your gem pile, it's the crashing of these that makes this combine action so special. Crashing allows you to break gems apart and send them from your gem pile into your opponent's. Playing a crash gem only sends 1 gem at a time, so crashing a 1 gem will just send that single gem over to your opponent. However, crashing a 3 gem will break that gem into 3 1 gems, all of which will be sent over to your opponent, effectively creating more bang for the buck. Now, it's the manipulation of these gems that will ultimately make the game interesting or dull for potential players. Puzzle Strike is definitely one of the most unique deck building style games on the market, and not just for the most obvious reasons, being that it utilizes chips instead of cards to drive the gameplay. There's a lot of other reasons that it stands on its own merits, such as it's inherently a lot more confrontational than most deck building games. It uses unique characters that provide players with different sets of abilities. It has player elimination, and also a mechanic that provides some assistance to allow players who are very close to losing a chance to get back into the game. So when you look at a game like Puzzle Strike as a whole, you have to weigh all those strengths of it being unique with the weaknesses that it inherently brings in from being a chip game compared to a card-delivered game. Let me start off by saying that I personally really enjoy playing Puzzle Strike quite a lot, and find it more entertaining and interesting to me than a lot of the other deck building games on the market. Now, I'm very partial to the theme, and that may be one of the reasons why, but I also like the unique feeling that each of the 10 characters brings to the game, and I really enjoy the decisions that you have to make in the game on whether or not to spend your entire turn playing out all the possible cute little actions and combinations of actions of your deck, are using that turn instead to combine and crash gems into your opponents, because there's really not enough time or enough actions in a turn to be able to do both effectively. I also really enjoy the frantic nature that the game instills by automatically increasing your gem pile each turn, making each of your actions more and more important as the game goes on. Now, all those things aside though, Puzzle Strike still stands out as a very mechanically solid game, and it feels like it's been well play tested, and there's enough variety in the game to encourage a lot of repeated plays, especially since the game only takes about 20 to 25 minutes to play out. The only real objective I have with the game doesn't really have anything to do with the rules of the gameplay. It's more or less the components. Now, everyone is going to have differing opinions about the validity of using chips versus cards in this style of game. Thematically, it kind of makes sense to represent the gems and all the other components with these chips, but physically, it is a bit awkward to get used to. Now, although the chips are extremely well made in this edition, they are small, which allow for almost no artwork in the game and fewer lines of possible text than what cards could provide, which make reading them a lot more difficult than what most people are used to with cards. Now, theoretically, shuffling chips in a bag is a really good idea. However, drawing them out in the correct amounts and so that their facings aren't always facing your opponents become a real problem, and observant opponents are always going to be able to take notice of what you're drawing unless you're very careful about drawing them out. Now, these are just very small cosmetic issues, and if you like having these unique chips and you think it brings more to the table for you as a gamer, then by all means you're still going to enjoy this game because there's a lot going for it and it's a really well made, very solid style deck building game. The most important quality of all, though, is whether or not the game is enjoyable and fun for its players. And in this instance, Puzzle Strike is most definitely a top-notch deck-building game, and currently one of my favorites in the genre. So that is Puzzle Strike. I am Jeremy Salinas, and thank you very much for watching.